Good evening and welcome to the Monday night edition of The People Show on intellectualradio.com, iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I'm Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator here with you on this very special occasion of The People Show. And we tonight are going to be, for the first half of our program, we're going to be remembering, reflecting, and honoring the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson, his life, and the breadth and width of his service. On October the 8th of 1941, in Greenville, South Carolina, Jesse Louis Jackson Sr. entered a world designed by color lines and shut off by closed doors. His mother, Helen Burns, and his father, Noah Robinson, gave him life. His stepfather, Charles Henry Jackson, gave him a name. And the red soil of the Jim Crow South gave him a lesson America has yet to fully learn. That what the nation cast aside, God crowns with purpose. Scripture asks in the Gospel of John, can anything good come out of Nazareth? The question was not really about Nazareth. He was born in a nation that had not yet decided to love him. Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson, we're going to be talking about him, and I have a host of others who are going to be joining me for this first phase of the program, for the first 30 minutes of the program, and we're going to be they're going to be sharing their experiences with Reverend Jackson. I came into contact with Reverend Jackson, the very first time that I came in contact with Reverend Jackson is during the 1994 Hurricane Andrew. When Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida and FEMA and the emergency resources were not coming fast enough, Reverend Jackson helicoptered into the field of the schoolyard called Frank C. Martin Elementary, where he was surrounded by many of the residents of Richmond Heights, Florida, which is where I was born and raised. It was the first time that I had ever seen Reverend Jackson, but the first time that I'd actually come in contact with Reverend Jackson was later in 2003, when Bonita Barker was the CFO of Rainbow Push, and I was a mortgage broker at the time. And we were having a real issue with some of the practices that the state of Illinois was trying to impugn on mortgage brokers at the time. We went to Rainbow Push, met with Bonita Parker, and from that point forth, the rest is history. I got extraordinarily involved with Rainbow Push from 2003 until this very day. I was involved with the Trade Bureau, facilitating the Trade Bureau, as well as setting up the foreclosure workshop for Rainbow Push. And then, of course, if you know about working with Reverend Jackson, you could be summoned to do a little of everything. But I had the privilege and the honor to listen, to learn from, to watch this person who we had not fully appreciated the breadth and width and the capacity of our modern day Dr. Martin Luther King, that we were able to live with, we were able to work with, work aside, sit down, talk with, learn from, and exchange from this person who has gone on to glory and has made his transition. But we are now fully getting the breadth and width of the capacity of this awesome person. And I am just full and overjoyed and blessed to be grateful to be here in a time where over the last 25 or 27 plus years that I had the opportunity to be around this individual and to learn from them. And in my philosophy of honoring someone is not just remembering and reflecting on the capacity and the great work that they did, but that is continuing that service, continuing in that spirit and continuing in that vein of what they stood for and what they represented. That is what I call true honoring a person of the magnitude of the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. So a little bit of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson is in all of us. And it is for those of us to renew our engagement and where we might have been a little bit in despair, which is something that you never saw of Reverend Jackson. I'm sure there has been moments that he may have felt that, but he never ever displayed that in front of us. And I think you're going to hear from people who are you're going to hear a synthesis of that type of experience from all of their own individual experiences. And so joining me for this conversation is going to be several people, and I'm going to be bringing to the studio Betty Magnus, who has been working for Reverend for more years than I would know, but she's going to tell her own experience, and Miss Attorney Barbara Arnwine, who was a guest on my program when I was on the radio at WVON. That she would come on the program and share information about voting and registering to vote. So they both are here with me here tonight, and we have some others that are going to be joining us. I want to bring into the studio Ms. Betty Magnus, and I want to bring in Attorney Barbara Arnwine. Betty and Barbara, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm going to start with you first, Betty. And just if you can just share what your thoughts have been over this past 10 days of celebrating the life of somebody who has been certainly integral in your life and that you have been involved with. And then we'll hear from Barbara, and you can share on what Reverend Jackson meant to you.
It's been a whirlwind of things. It's been a lot of work, a lot of tears, a lot of various emotions. Starting, I guess I would start with the visitation in Chicago, where hundreds of thousands of people came to view him. And I was pleased with the number of people who kept their children out of school to bring them to come and view the late Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr., especially there was a nursery school. That's one of those little daycare centers where the kids hold on to the rope to stay in line with each other and not get taken away, not get lost. And as they came up to view Reverend Congressman Jonathan Jackson and Jesse Jackson Jr. picked them up so they could look and then set them back down because they weren't even as tall as the casket. That's how young they were. And the fact that the daycare center thought enough of Reverend to bring those children, that is something they will remember for the rest of their lives. They may not realize how important it is right now, but later on in life they will, and be thankful that they were able to. And then I went on a cavalcade, I'll call it, to South Carolina. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. The flags all over that state were at half staff. On the way to South Carolina, every state we passed through gave us 2 state troopers to guide us through that state. It was just amazing how people felt. And the flags were supposed to fly at half staff until after Saturday. That from a state that was the first state to secede from the Union that started the Civil War. And he land state in South Carolina on the rotunda. And people were lined up, double lined up by the thousands to come and see him. It was just amazing. Mayors from Black, white, Asian, from all over that state came to speak. All of the state representatives and state senators were there. And to see, they say a prophet in his own hometown is not honored, but that was the state that he was born in. Those are the things I will carry with me as I try to get through this in the coming days.
Barbara?
She's muted.
You're muted, Barbara. We can't hear you.
First of all, Betty, much love to you. You stood by his side for decades, and he loved you. One thing anybody who knows Reverend knows about him is that he had this immense heart of love. And there were people who meant everything to him. And Betty Magnus, I met Betty through the mighty Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. And I have never, ever been more grateful for a door that was opened than the door that he opened through his big heart to Betty and so many others. Betty, it's just a pleasure to be on this show with you. You are one of our true giants when it comes to voting rights. Thank you for everything that you've done. My biggest gratitude for Reverend Jackson is that he changed so many people. And those people went out and changed the world. I traveled in Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Philadelphia, Newark, you go, Cincinnati, you mentioned all Missouri, you mentioned all these places, and somebody's going to tell you that they're in that position that they're in as an elected official because of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. That's how broad his impact was. That is just, I don't know anybody like that. He was one of a kind. He was totally and completely unique. And those of us who have had the joy of living at the time that he lived have to know that we have seen a special giant who has been walking in our times. I know, I saw him, of course, with Nelson Mandela, and know that, there's another giant. But they saw and greeted each other as what? Equals? One had a whole nation to run, one of the largest nations in the world to run. And the other had a world to run. I just love me some Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. I will always celebrate God's grace in bringing him into my life.
Well, thank you. We're going to share a whole lot in this time that we have together here. I've been looking forward to this and speaking with people who have worked with Reverend a lot longer, and in some cases a lot closer. As I opened up and said that I started engaging and working around Rainbow Push in 2003. Because I went to Rainbow Push because we were having a problem. But in having a problem, and that we wanted to have a problem addressed, and then out of that came the responsibility of engaging. Because Reverend Jackson was that person that if you had a problem or you had an idea, Reverend Jackson would say, well, there's room for you to get to work and to get busy. And I remember that there was a question that was asked of Reverend Jackson. I read somewhere where somebody asked him, well, how is it that you were so close to Dr. King? And what Reverend Jackson said was, well, the line was not long. In other words, to do this work, there are not people lining up. as they would be lining up to go into a concert somewhere where tickets would run out. But I am really grateful and glad that I responded to the call, because my advocacy is shaped by the leadership of Reverend Jackson, and watching and learning from Reverend Jackson. And one of the things that Reverend Jackson, a story that he told, one of the first time that I had gone into his office, and I felt a little bit intimidated, but he quickly made everybody feel comfortable that you were not in some place that was some sort of mausoleum. You were welcome to come into his door. His door was rarely closed or locked, and he allowed for people to come into that space, where you go into most CEOs, you can't even get even close to them. But he never gave off that type of air of being someone of the magnitude that we know him to be, and of the capacity that he had. He was always connected to the average person, always connected. This is a person who has been with presidents and princes and people from around the world, but he never lost his connection with the common man and the common woman, ever. And so, but there was a story that he told us about staying engaged. And he said, the only people who don't get any dirt on them in the game are the people who sit on the bench. If your uniform is always clean, that just means that you're not in the game. But if you're in the game, you're going to get a little dirt on you, and you're going to commit a few penalties, and you pay the price of the penalties, but you get up and you keep going. He said in a football game, there are 11 men. Now, I can certainly identify with that because I played the sport. There are 11 men on each side. Both of them are looking forward. Neither time are they looking back. One is trying to go forward, and the other is trying to stop the other from going forward. But they're both looking forward. And he said, that is what your focus is, no matter what. You don't get caught up with all the distractions, but you continue to move forward. There is no room for despair. And he exemplified that in his work. Certainly in the 25 plus years that I was there, I never saw Reverend Jackson look back. I never saw Reverend Jackson be in a pity party or feeling sorry for himself by somebody who might be, making fun of him or throwing insults. He never, ever dismissed people, even his harshest critics. Even sometimes we would be frustrated with him. But he exemplified that leadership, and he would take a situation and he could contextualize that situation so that you could see the problem, understand the solution, and hold people accountable to it. And so I want to play this one clip from him when he was on the Tony, I think it was is it Tony Jones? I can't remember, but it was on as an early part of his advocacy. Here is Reverend Jackson contextualizing the problem of economics, the problem of drugs, and the people who are responsible for addressing those concerns. Let's take a look at this clip.
We're really putting an awful lot of emphasis into dealing with the effects of this economy upon all poor people, our people in particular. I think our movement now has to have a dual focus: economic generation and spiritual regeneration. Economic generation to the extent that we have more than 6 million people unemployed, 25 million people making less than $3,000 a year, another 25 million less than 6,000, another 25 million less than 9,000. And given the inflated economy, that means that you have 3 levels of real poverty in the country. So that is a critical question. On the other hand, we have a kind of deteriorating spiritual condition in the black community where our young people are trapped pushing dope in their veins rather than hope in their brains, and pickling their brains with liquor, and using all kinds of ways to escape reality. It is at that level that we must be spiritually regenerated, because if we have a new school and don't have the will to learn, it's of no avail. Or if we got a job and don't have the will to work, or we have the opportunity and can't seize it because we've tripped out. So it is at that level we must have a dual focus. I guess biblically speaking, you would say that man cannot live by bread alone. You need the bread and the spiritual development. The question becomes, how do you break such a recession as this? Number one, you point to the weaknesses of it. The inflation that we're now on is not a consumer-inspired inflation where people have spent too much, but rather because the super rich and the military budget have been made into sacred cows. Ford says he's going to save $5 billion in surtax. Well, the fact is the military budget's growth is $7 billion a year. Why is that $7 billion sacred? You ask people making $15,000 a year to tighten up their belts. Well, they're already wearing suspenders because their real income has been eaten up by inflation. Then he says that if we save $20 billion from federal spending, we can break stagflation. Well, the Proxima report indicates that the military spent beyond its appropriations last year $27 billion. Now, that plus the super rich not being taxed properly and being allowed to develop monopolies and run competition out of business, that is why the economy is jammed. So, on the one hand, we must know that. On the other hand, we must prepare to hit these streets marching again en masse. January 15th this year, which is Dr. King's birth date, we're going to celebrate it by marching in at least 50 cities simultaneously. Marching, I might add, behind the Hawkins full employment bill, demanding that once and for all that is declared in this country that everybody has a right to a job, a decent house, and medical care. In my judgment, that's where the struggle is now. It's not as much civil rights as it is civil rights. It's a matter of redefining the economy.
That was a young Reverend Jesse Jackson during the Ford administration. We got some other clips that we're going to show. Joining us is my co-host that is typically with me every other Monday, Monroe Anderson. And Monroe Anderson, who was the press secretary for the late Mayor Eugene Sawyer, and who also covered Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so we're going to hear from him. And then also going to be joining us is a young, I think, Gen Z or Gen ZX, who is a graduate student. Edward Ward is going to be joining us to talk about what their experience and how Reverend Jackson impacted their lives. But we first want to hear from Monroe Anderson. Monroe, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. That TV host was Tony Brown.
Right.
Yes.
Tony
Yeah.
Brown.
Tony Brown. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was hot
Way
stuff.
back.
Yeah.
So Monroe, you covered Reverend Jackson. So you've been on both sides. You've been on the good side and on maybe the not so good side.
Yeah, right.
So tell us about, yeah. So talk to us about how and what Reverend Jackson, now that he has gone on into eternity, and we are now going to fully envelop the magnitude of this great personality that we all had the ability to be around. So tell us about how Reverend Jackson impacted you as a journalist, as a person, and as a Black man.
As a journalist, for most of his career, Reverend Jackson was hot copy. Yeah, he had stuff to say. I mean, and he was physically and mentally aware at all times. In the late 1979, 1980, I was working at the Chicago Tribune, and I covered Operation Push every week. I was there every week. And so I would watch his speeches evolve. What he had basically, people, I don't think most people realized it, but he really had a basic speech he gave But then whatever the hot news was or whatever the crisis was for that week, he would take his speech and advance it. But you still get the I am somebody's and those type of things in the speech where they would copy. But on the other hand, he would take whatever he wanted to talk about or needed to talk about, or whatever celebrity he had that Saturday in the audience that he was building the the meeting around. And so it was fascinating just to watch him, and he'd have the press, he'd have us front row to the left, so he could keep an eye on us, and we could keep an eye on. You know, uh, and so and Jesse he seduced the media. I mean, literally. I mean, not literally. Well, maybe literally sometimes, but usually he seduced the media. He would find something that he could interest you in and get you interested in him, and try and get the proper coverage at all times. For example, when I got my column at the Tribune, this was in 1983. I got an op-ed page column in the Tribune, and Jesse invited me over to his house for lunch one day, and Jackie was cooking in the kitchen, and he took me out to the garage, which he had turned into a makeshift shift office. And he started telling me about how when he first took over and started the organization, he was 30 years old and young, and basically uh, didn't know exactly what he was doing then, but he was experimenting. Says, but he had basically he was saying he had mellowed now and in his older age. And then he mentions to me, he says, William Raspberry is my friend. And William Raspberry was a black columnist at the Washington
Yeah.
Post. And then he says to me, he says, I want you to be my friend. And so whenever I needed that ace in the hole, that's what I tell Jesse Jackson is my friend. Because he could have told him, yes, of course. But the other thing is Jesse had so many profound things. He was everywhere doing everything, and so he framed a lot of us influencers in the media. He framed our thinking by what he saw and said, and so he would bring it to life. He would say it in a very interesting way, and he would bring it to life so that when you were doing your thing as a journalist, you factored that in. I mean, you were influenced by him in many cases. And the other thing was, which a lot of people may not realize, is that he influenced white media, legacy media. Um, he would come into a situation where some journalist was being mistreated, we'll say, by their employer, and he would come there and draw attention to it, and sometimes demand to meet the editors or whoever. Um, you had a situation where the Sun Times fired Lacey Banks.
Right.
Lacey Banks was a sports writer,
Right.
a columnist at the Sun Times, and Lacey had differences with a white editor there, and so the editor got upset because Lacey had difference with him. Basically, Lacey said he was a racist, and I have no, I didn't know the guy, but I wouldn't be surprised. And and Lacey was careful about calling people racist. But anyway, they fired him, and Jesse talked with the management at some point, and they took him back. He got back, and Lacey said to everybody that the Reverend Jackson got his job back. There would be situations where there were news operations, newspapers, TV stations, or something that again they didn't have either didn't have black people at all, or had too few black people, or who were uh, jacking up a black person, and Jesse would come riding in there and do his thing, and frequently the situation got resolved in the reporter's favor.
All right. I'm not
Mark,
sure.
can I make one point?
Yeah, I wanted to come right. I'm coming right to you. I want you can follow up on that. But Betty, I want you to give us your tenure because you've been there a long time, and to talk about your start there. What is your role that you continue to serve in at Rainbow Push and your relationship with Reverend Jackson?
Okay, I came to Operation Breadbasket as a volunteer with Reverend Jackson. Started out as a volunteer usher, and I had not been involved in the civil rights movement prior to that time because I was not a turn the other cheek type person, and I thought there was nothing else I could do. I ultimately found out that they did need administrative skills in the office. Oh my God, I am so sorry. I forgot to turn my phone off. And so they were preparing for Expo, and they had hired me in the communications department with Dave Wallace, who Reverend went to school with, and Gary Massoni was working there. Also at that time, Richard Thomas was the executive director for Expo, and found out that I not only could type but also took shorthand. And they hired me to work at Breadbasket, which at that time the office was on 47th and King Drive, right up over where Peach's Restaurant is now. Where Peach's Restaurant used to be Tiny Tot shop, which sold children's clothes back in there. And it was I came in 68, and I believe I was hired in 69 when they were getting ready for the first Expo. And Reverend Jackson ultimately, after Expo, started a political education department with Alistair Gay and Reverend Calvin Morris and I think her last name was Evelina Desadier. And Alice put a group of us together to teach political education, and people would take the class for 6 weeks. And following that, we went into, and they'd get a graduation certificate. Frank Watkins taught research, and we taught how to become what it took to become a campaign manager, and every aspect of running a campaign we taught. I taught communications because I was in the public relations department of Breadbasket at that time. When we became Operation Push, we expanded it more, and Reverend said, there are people in jail. Well, and this was leading into Harold Washington's campaign. I'm fast forwarding now to not just take up all of your time. And he said, there are people in jail who have not been convicted of anything, and they should not lose their right to vote just because they're in jail. As a result of that, we fought and got legislation passed so that people in jail who had not been convicted were allowed to register. And then in later years, recently, they now have actual voting. They've turned the county jails into polling places in the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois has the best voting programs of any state in the country. And I am a part of a committee now that is with Chicago Votes. We have an act we're trying to get passed called the SAVE Act, The SAVE Act will allow prisoners, people who have been convicted, the right to vote. And I belong to a coalition that is getting what Reverend Jackson professed all the time, the Jesse L. Jackson Senior Youth Empowerment Act, which will allow seniors who will be 18, or young people rather, who will be 18 by the next general election, the opportunity to register and to vote so that they graduate with what Reverend Jackson always said they should have: a diploma in one hand and a voter registration card in the other. But the point I wanted to make is when you were talking about how Reverend Jackson could get everyone on his side, when he ran for president in '88, no matter what the question was, this goes back to what Monroe was talking about, he would answer the question and end it with free Mandela in South Africa. He was the only candidate at that time who was talking about Mandela. By the time they got down to the wires with that '88 election, every candidate on the stage figured out how to say free Mandela in whatever answers they gave. And that was one of the geniuses of Reverend Jackson, to get in and points that were important regardless to what. He did not answer the question. He would answer the question and end it with, and we must not forget how important it will be to free Mandela. At the services this past week, the Little League, Jackie Robinson Little League team that won the national series, and then they took them to court and took that title away from them. And one of those kids, DJ Butler, his mother stayed in the fight, and you didn't see much about it on the paper in the papers, but they won that court case, and they were awarded that trophy again. It has not happened. His son Jonathan is going to carry that on and bring it to fruition. But he made sure that I contacted them so that they were able to come, those that were able to come. DJ flew in. That was a little bitty kid that was on the team. He has been, and 5 of them, to my knowledge, have been called to major league teams and are working. They went to college, but they also were called up to major league teams. And DJ was able to come this past weekend. He flew in from Arizona and had to go back Sunday. But Reverend stayed with those kids. He never stopped fighting for that right. And that's the kind of thing you don't see in the news. The things that he did behind the scenes, where he kept fighting for the rights of the man who couldn't do it all by themselves. And I just want to share that.
All right. Is Edward Ward with us? The young man, Edward Ward, are you there? Please turn your camera on. I'd like to bring you in the studio. There he is. All right, so we're going to bring, I'm not sure, I guess he's in the Gen Z or Gen Z X. He can tell us what generation he's in. So welcome to the program, Edward. Please share with us what your contact, or how you came in contact with Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push, and what impact does Reverend Jackson have on you and your generation?
Thank you. So I currently sit at the edge of the millennial generation, so I'm still one of what they refer to as the young millennials.
Yeah, Edward, I think your audio, we're having a problem with your audio.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can't. It's completely garbled. All right, see if you can't work on that. We're going to bring you back, okay? All right, Barbara. Now you have been working with in a different area. You live now in Washington D.C.
Yes.
And you know, if you are leading an organization of any type, obviously you have to have people that you trust, but you also have to have people who are committed to your
Mission.
vision and
Yes.
your mission. And so, what brought you to Rainbow Push? How long have you been involved with Rainbow Push? And obviously, you are very passionate about the area in which you are working.
Well, I was blessed because Reverend Jackson found me. I knew about him. I never, when I was in college, I was learning about shareholders and about the, stock and how you could influence corporations. I was watching him, and it was, brand new knowledge that I had never known. But I really didn't get to know him until I went to the lawyers committee, and he must have heard because he sent a message that I was to come to, as everybody knows, the famous Saturday morning forum, and that he wanted me there. And when I got that message that he would like me to attend, I was really blown away. And I was like, okay, I'll do this. And when I went and I was on the panel and I participated afterwards, I went out, with everybody. We had, we would, have lunch together. We would, you know, uh, talk and spend time together, and we became friends because, and I mean, people of there is no truer friend than Jesse Jackson. I don't care what anybody's got to say. I mean, when you are his friend, he would go to bat for you.
Yes,
Just like you told the story of Lacey. I mean, he fought for us in a way that no one could. So when I created the map of shame around, the voter suppression in 2011, that's when he and I really became buddies because he looked at that map. He had me walk him through it a couple of times. And he said, everybody has to know this. He got on the line and started calling all his people. He said, we got to set up a press conference. I want Maxine Waters there. I want the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. And he started organizing. And he said, Barbara, you got to take that map and you got to blow it up, so that we can have something people can see. And, and I need you to work on the language. Don't have it, all this legalese. I want you to break it down. And that is when we really connected and became, I would say, really close friends. And I became his legal advisor on voting rights after that. And I would say, I'm sure he had others, but I know that I was one of his close legal advisors on voting rights, and I love the fact that he always was multifaceted. He always saw things from not only the litigation angle, not only the public education angle, but he also looked at the legislative and public policy angles. But most importantly, he believed in organizing. The one thing I gotta say, because I can't get off this show at any point without saying one thing about Reverend Jackson. I've known a lot of leaders. I've hung around with some of the top leaders in this country. That includes presidents and head majority leaders, etc. But one thing about Reverend Jackson that was totally 100% unique was his boldness. I've never met a man so bold in my life. Uh, and when I'll never forget when we were in Brunswick, and that guy gave out one of the attorneys spoke about in his kind of like Klan language about they didn't want nobody like Reverend Jesse Jackson coming up in their Georgia in their state and causing any trouble with these black folks and all this kind of stuff. Reverend Jackson called me within an hour and said, "How soon can I get there?" Tell me I can't come. Well, I'm on my way. And this was when he was sick. He was already fighting, for mobility. But that's the kind of boldness he had. He never, ever saw a limitation. He always saw what was possible. And I just loved him because he came to my defense when I would be under attack. He taught me how to be proud, how to stand tall, and how to, be a better leader. And he loved young people, and he really respected the work we do with young people. So
Hey, Barbara,
that's all I can say.
Barbara, I have a question for you.
Yes,
When he was
Earl.
rounding up all these people, these leaders, and he told you to call them, did you ever get any people who were, I don't know, I might have to watch the grass grow today or the paint dry or something? Did they all, were they easy? Were they eager to come when he put something together like that?
No, now as well as I do that there are people who ran from him.
Yeah,
Who
right,
come on,
right.
who were afraid to be associated,
Yeah,
because of his boldness, because of his independence.
yeah,
There was no doubt about it. But one thing I liked about him was that didn't bother him. He had a grace. He had something that you rarely see in life. Now, I talked about his boldness, but his
yeah,
graciousness. He had a sense of grace that I think very few people really understand. We use that word all the time, but he was so gracious. And so he was big enough to forgive. He had a heart big enough to enlist and educate. He had
yeah,
patience. He had so many gifts. And I
yeah,
just, I miss him terribly, terribly.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we are going to obviously Reverend Jackson is much bigger and much greater than any of us could extol, and he will be absolutely written in the annals of history and going forward, because all of our advocacy, we will be reciting Reverend Jackson as Reverend Jackson recited and inserted Dr. King. So, so we are going to continue to celebrate him. But I want to thank Barbara Arnwine, attorney Barbara Arnwine, who seems, I think she's holding her grandchild. Is that a granddaughter?
Yes, it's my
All
new
right.
grandbaby.
Yeah. All right.
Who, by the
Congratulations.
way, one of her middle names is Jessie, after Reverend
Ah,
Jesse Jackson. She was born 2 days after he passed. And so this
wow.
is her mother, Caitlin.
Hey, Daddy.
How are you, Caitlin?
Hi.
How you doing? All
Good.
right. Thank you.
It's-
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Carrying the name forward.
yes,
Yes.
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 Gift
Yeah.
from
All
God.
right. All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you, Attorney Barbara Arnwine, and you and I are going to
Thank you.
continue to talk. Betty, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on to having this conversation. Now, look, this is just the first of many conversations, because there's just not enough time for us to really expound on it. But we have to absolutely make sure that we carry forward Reverend Jackson and have him connected with all these with the work that we do, and we continue in his work. And I always say, if you are going to truly honor someone that you respect, you carry that mission forward.
Amen.
That is the greatest honor and the responsibility that we have. So we're gonna come back, and then I'm gonna bring Edward back. I'm going to bring him back to come on with us on another time. We couldn't get him in, but we are certainly going to bring them back. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Right.
All right.
And thank you for covering this. Just thank
Absolutely.
you.
Okay.
Really
Thank you so
much
much.
appreciated.
All
Take care.
right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Monroe, we got a lot to cover and a few minutes to cover it in. So want to talk about, we got a few things to talk about. I went to all of the celebration with Reverend Jackson's from the viewing. Both days I went and spent several hours at the viewing, and I went to both the homegoing services, one out at the House of Hope and the one at Rainbow Push.
Yeah.
And of course, the story that is growing, that you even called me about, and I got several calls about, is about this conversation that Jesse Jr. Made about the three former presidents who came: former President Bill Clinton, former President Barack Obama, former President Joe Biden, and the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was there, and former Vice President Kamala Harris. And Jesse Jr. got up and made some comments that has people asking the question, what is it all about? And the comment that he made was that three presidents spoke about my father that do not know my father. And he made that comment on Friday. And then he came back on Saturday and doubled down on the comment as though he was very angry and bitter about it. And we're still very confused by his comment in his statement. And I think that, in my opinion about this, is that a funeral service, a life celebration, is about the person who has departed. And a eulogy, which in Reverend Jackson's case received multiple eulogies. And the word eulogy means to speak well of. That's what a eulogy is. And Jesse Jr. started this in his parents' front yard at a press conference following a few days after it had been announced that his father had made his transition. And he started admonishing people, saying that everybody is welcome: Republicans, Democrats, conservative, liberals, independent, you're all welcome, but don't bring your politics to our father's funeral. That was the first statement. And then this statement that he made at the services has a lot of people talking. It was written about in the New York Post, and it is, but the talk is not positive at Jesse Jr. It's more of people raising questions. What is this all about? What are your thoughts, and what did you think when you started to see this and hear this evolving?
I thought that it was fitting. You know, Reverend Jackson spoke at funerals all the time. He probably has done more funerals than anybody in America. He addressed at, and he didn't go there and not talk politics. You know, he was a political creature. So, if Reverend Jackson could have spoke at his memorial, he would have talked politics. He would have been talking about Trump. So it doesn't surprise me that you got people talking politics at Jesse's memorial. He's a very, very political man. He had incredible political influence. So, I saw it as, okay, that's the way it rolls. It's Jesse's, it would be, as far as I'm concerned, comparable to having Michael Jordan's funeral and nobody talking about basketball. You would get, I mean, well, you got people, basketball players, talking about basketball at Reverend Jackson's funeral. I mean, you can't confine it to one thing or another. It's about their life, and it depends on who's talking about it and how they were impacted by that person's life. And eulogy, the word may be good, and but the thing is, in people talking about you, what's good to them might not be good to somebody else. And Reverend Jackson was all his life was very controversial. Barbara said he was bold, and that could be a way, but he said things and did things that some people loved and some people hated. But he was Jesse, and he did what he thought was important for his chosen role on the world stage.
Well, this is why I deem that Jesse Jr.'s position and Jesse Jr.'s statements were inappropriate, because what his statements was that, in juxtaposing the position, his statement was about three political figures that, because of them being political figures, they became intertwined with Reverend Jackson.
Yeah.
If they were not political figures, more than likely they would not have been intertwined with Reverend Jackson.
Yeah.
And so the breadth and width of his impact hit many facets of life.
Right.
But the very core of addressing those issues was the political aspect.
Right.
And for him to insult these former presidents, for them talking about their relationship with Reverend Jackson and involvement with Reverend Jackson based on their intertwine of their political discussions about whatever issues that may have been prevalent at that time that they were in office. Now, he had a very integral relationship with Bill Clinton. There was no question about that, and a relationship that he was very, very.
Well, the thing is, as a son, particularly a namesake son, except for Jackie Jackson, nobody's going to know him as well as Jesse Jr. did. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But
Right.
They knew, each of those presidents knew Jesse in a particular way, in connection with their careers and lives and what have you. And that's what they were addressing. And that's fair game to me, because Jesse is going to go down as one of the most important figures in the 20th century. And I'm not talking about black, I'm talking about just in general, because of although of course he had an impact on black people that's incredible. But he had other influences as well. For example, when he ran for president, the Democrats had this rule that in the primaries, winner take all, and he protested against that because what it in effect did was leave anybody out who wasn't connected.
Right. The Democratic Party could handpick who their nominee
Exactly.
was. All right,
Exactly.
and you're really going to a smokescreen. But because
Right.
he demonstrated and contested that,
Right.
it facilitated for someone to come along like a Bill Clinton,
Right.
as well as a Barack Obama, and be
Right.
elected to the presidency. Were it
Exactly.
not for that change, Bill Clinton would not have become the president of the United States, because the Democratic Party was not that favorable of Bill Clinton at the time.
Right. And yeah, and the other thing is Jesse was creative, very creative. For example, these all these Fortune 500 companies were discriminatory, uh, and what Jesse did was he started buying stock in these companies. Not much. Sometimes he just buy 20 shares or whatever. I mean, he wasn't buying big pieces, but he's bought enough that officially made him a stockholder. And when you're a stockholder, you can go to their annual meetings because they have them. And if you don't own stock, you can't go. But if you
Right.
own stock, you can legitimately go. So he became a stockholder in these corporations meetings, and he would go to the meetings and confront them on, well, where who was on your board, what black person was on your corporate board, uh, how many black people did you have? I mean, he would address things that would draw attention and force them to make changes, and that's how things change happen with Jesse. Now, part of the challenge of being Jesse Jackson was that Jesse was like a heat-seeking missile when it came to a camera, a TV camera, a photograph. I mean, he would be right there. But he also lured, because he showed up someplace, the media showed up there. And so you'd have a situation. I'm going to use your red light issue just as a point now. It's different in that you are here in Chicago and Jesse was here in Chicago. So that was different from, let's say you were in Des Moines, Iowa, and you had this issue, and they were discriminating, and Jesse would fly to town. And now you've been working on this issue for years, as you have with the red light thing. Jesse would fly into town, um, give a speech, address it. TV cameras would come from all kinds of different places, and Jesse would get all the glory. And as a leader, you go, I've been working on this for 3 months, 3 years, and I'm not getting any recognition for it. And a lot of people didn't like that, but they couldn't complain about it because that was a reality. Jesse would come in
Well,
and dick you.
it's a reality, but I think that this is where a lot of people, or some people, I should say,
Yeah,
miss what the mission is. The mission is not about someone, and I get it that we all want to be, and we all would like to be appreciated. I get that, right? But when you are in
yeah,
public service, and this was we were reminded about this all throughout the celebration, about Jesse's work was not
yeah,
about Jesse himself. His work was about helping others. And in helping others,
yeah,
you become a source. And he utilized reporters and utilized the cameras to elevate whatever was going on at the time, to bring attention, to expose to those who had the power and the authority to address the issue.
Yeah.
So it was used as a tool, not as to elevate himself so that, somebody can tell him, I saw you on television, but to use it as a tool, because if the media is coming to report on what you're doing or to see what you're doing, it must be important if the news outlets are going to send their resources to go cover what that person is doing. So that is not something that comes easy, or it is just commonplace. It was a tool that he was able to effectively use to address whatever the issue was, as you say. Now, unfortunately, some people who didn't like that didn't really understand that what he was doing was lending himself to elevate you and the issue that you had been struggling with for whatever time that you've been struggling with. He could force those who had the power to make those changes.
Right. Yeah, but they were jealous, and jealousy is a human trait. That's
Sure.
difficult to get over.
Well, there is jealousy, but there's also ignorance.
Yeah.
Because that was out there. Because you would have people who would be dogging and criticizing Jesse, but they've never stepped foot into Rainbow Push. They've never took 5 minutes to sit down and ask questions of Reverend Jackson or anybody who was significantly involved with Rainbow Push. What is it all about? How can we learn more about what you're doing, or even be involved in that process, or something that they may thought was important? So there's a level of the envy, but I think it's also intertwined with ignorance.
Yeah. There's so many issues. So many things going on with Jesse. He had it was only one of him, and he had choices to make all the time.
All the time.
I was a Tribune reporter back in '83 when he was thinking about running for president. He was being encouraged to run, and so he went on his first fact-finding trip. I accompanied him covering him as a Tribune reporter, and we went to New Hampshire. And this white guy had invited Jesse to his house to talk about issues, to meet the candidate basically. And so we arrived there, and we're pulling up to this guy's house, and it's in a white suburb someplace. I don't remember. And his neighbors, his white neighbors, because New Hampshire's like minimally black to begin with, but this guy's white neighbors were lined up on the sidewalk along the street just to see Jesse Jackson. Okay, then he goes into the house, and this guy, he was just like, this guy was pink. He had freckles. He was really white, and he was a little overweight, and he was so thrilled to have Jesse Jackson there that he was giggling and bouncing up and down as he talked. And he had friends who would come to dinner, and all these people were just in awe of Jesse. And this is before Jesse had decided whether he was going to run or not. This was why he was out there to check it out. And I saw that, and I said, yeah, he could run. He could get some white votes. Jesse will get some white votes. He's not just a black candidate. And of course, he did. He didn't get enough white votes, but he got white votes.
Well, he certainly got more than they expected for him to get. Look, he only
Exactly.
came second to Dukakis by, I forget what the number is, but it wasn't a significant amount. I think like 117,000 votes or something like that.
Yeah.
That he came in as the runner-up to Dukakis, who got the nomination and then certainly got wiped out in the election.
Yeah. Are you
Yeah.
talking 84 or 88? Because I'm trying to.
88.
Okay, I'm talking 84.
Yeah.
I'm talking 80. If we went with, when I went with him, it was literally his first trip to see how he'd be accepted as a candidate.
Right. Okay.
And that was the answer, and he still he was at that time he was in a frame of mind of, okay, well, we need to, instead of just protesting, we need to be in politics and to be a player and at the table. And he was hesitant to do it. He thought a politician should do it. Basically, he was thinking
Right.
a politician
Right.
should do it.
Right.
And nobody could do it like he did. And so eventually he became the candidate. But
Right.
it was, that 84 was an experiment. 88 was he thought he could actually get it. I mean, he was going for it for real. The first time it was like, okay, well, how would this thing work, and is possible and conceivable?
Well, I think that, and I believe that the 84 campaign was really not about running for president, but it is really about changing the system.
Yeah.
And when he was talking to other people about running to change the system, they couldn't get anyone to step up to agree to be the candidate to run. So he felt that he had to run because no one would take the position.
Well, he was being, he was being encouraged. That was the "Run Jesse Run" chant.
Yeah.
That time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I got a few more minutes with you. There's some things brewing here on the home front and abroad.
Yeah.
So the president has got us into a war, and now the problem that we're hearing from people like the former I think it was the former Secretary General, was it Brennan today, that is saying that that the president, rather than in informing us about keeping citizens safe, because Iran might not be able to send a bomb to the United States, but they certainly could put insurgents into the United States and could be exacting violence all over in terms of retaliation. But there is this real concern that because of what the president has done in terms of compromising the federal government and the FBI, and this disconnect between state and the federal government in terms of providing information to keep us safe, that there are some real concerns that we could see a lot of violence being exacted in this country by these shadow people from Iran.
Well, they sometimes have these undercover. The term is slipping my mind now, but where they have these groups of people that are are undercover and in the country and waiting to attack, to blow something up or kill somebody or something like that. And they have those people here. But but the thing is, the problem is Trump is ignorant. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's not president material by any stretch of the imagination. He shouldn't even be president of the Obama Book Club, as far as I'm concerned. And so he puts us in this war with no idea of why we're fighting the war and how we should end the war and what our exit plan is going to be and how American citizens who are living in the Middle East should be protected or removed so they can't become targets. I mean, the planning is crazy. The only good part of this stupid war that we're doing right now is that the military part. It showed how good our military was. The U.S.
Well,
military.
it shows how good our military can do at bombing and killing women and children
Yeah, but that's what war does.
People.
Yeah,
So
that's what war does. Yeah, and so it's
but there's never been a question about the might of the military of the United States. That's been known for for decades, of the enormous power that the United States military
right. We spend more money on our military than the top 5 countries, including China and Russia combined. I mean, we spend a whole lot of money on it, and we have the finest weapons, and that's turning Trump on. It's like at Hexbeth, he's talking about it like it's a computer game, not human lives.
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's like some little boys,
right?
It's little boys,
right?
That are getting their jollies off because they're able to blow something up,
right?
And so, but here it is. They're talking about regime change. The only thing that you've done is change one radical person to a younger radical person.
Yeah,
you got rid of an 86-year-old radical, and they installed the 56-year-old son who is radical. That's what you do.
Right.
Donald Trump had a 1-hour conversation with Putin, and after the 1-hour conversation with Putin, he comes out, sort of waving the white flag. But as a result of the regime change, you may have been able to, change one radical to the other, but you're not going to change. You might even be able to change, the leadership, but you're not going to change these people's ideology and their philosophy of what they believe, in that country.
Well, Iran is the oldest empire in the history of the world. It was Persia, and Persia is talked about in the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah. For people who are Christian, they will know the importance of Persia, and so there are proud people with a very long and distinguished history, and so some upstart 250-year-old country is not going to come in and change them or influence them.
Right. I mean, they thought that Iran, with a country of 92 million people, that they thought that they could just go in and drop some bombs, and now they're talking about toppling the government of, or certainly the the government of Cuba,
Yeah.
and and then of course you have the
Cuba's a
Cuban.
very small island, so that could be done. The U.S. could do that. They kill a lot of people in the process, of course, but they could do that. But they can't. There's no way we can go and easily do a run like that.
Without question. I mean, they've
They
even said, look, we're not asking for a cease war or
right,
ceasefire. They're not even asking for a ceasefire.
right,
And what
yeah,
country has Iran waged war on?
right, right, right. Well, the
And yet,
thing is, this been Netanyahu just using Trump. Trump is too stupid to realize that he's being played. He's the pawn in this game.
well, not only is he the pawn, but he is allowing people like Steve Miller and Russell Vogt to determine policy. These are the
Right.
people who are determining policy, and and these are the advisors that are pumping his head up with what they know that he needs to feel um, relevant or of any value. And of course, that gets his jollies off. So he does whatever it is that these other idiots suggest for him to authorize.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So
well,
yes, we got to worry about we we're in a bad situation, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's, what he has done is what was a problem for one country, Iran. He now and well, two countries, Iran and Israel. Now is a regional war going on, and it's going to expand. You're going to have a situation in Iran where it's civil war going on, possibly. I mean, it's just he's uncorked the genie's bottle, and he don't know what's coming out, and he don't know how to handle it, or it can't if it can be handled at all.
well, he thinks that he has done a good thing. He thinks that he's done a good thing, and it turns out that there's reports that the bomb that destroyed the school was an American weapon. It was
Right,
not an Iranian weapon. It was an American weapon, where
right,
you had this host or TV host of an idiot, Pete Hegseth, that is it is beyond astonishing that this is the guy who is in charge of running the most powerful um, weaponry in the world.
yeah.
And I didn't. What did you think of that? Well, I don't know what that was. Speech that he came out to give, to talk about, this was never meant to be a fair fight, and we played for keeps.
That was a speech that you'd expect from a frat boy in college who had 3 beers too many, and was talking about war or what have you, and had no had not given it a whole bunch of thought, just doing a rah rah, and he had played Call of Duty a lot of different times, and so That was his idea, mentality on war and how it should be spoken about. The problem is most soldiers don't like war. Generals, they don't like war because war is a terrible thing. And it should always be the last resort. And
Well, what do you think that is? What do you think that has happened within the military of all of those generals and
yeah,
who understand that
right,
philosophy, who understand that principle,
right.
that they who are or who have participated in these orders, which based on the Constitution and based on what we are hearing out of Congress, that it's illegal. So they have all engaged in an illegal attack on another country.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a problem. Trump is in fact the commander in chief. So this is the complication that they have, that they want to follow orders because that's what they were trained to do. But on the other hand, they're not legal orders. They're
Which
not.
which they are bound by the Constitution, that if your commander in chief are asking you to engage in something illegal, you
Well, but they're
have the
yeah,
responsibility
yeah.
not to.
Well, except it's not that cut and dry in that the president is the commander in chief, so he can call for actions like that. But then
Well, you can call for them, but you do not have, by the Constitution, you do not have to follow a command that is an illegal act. That's what the seven
yeah,
or the six
but
Congress people did.
yeah, I know. But right now, it's still not illegal because it's like the president can uh, do this, call for this type of action. But I think the number is 45 days. He has to get permission from the Congress because only they can declare war. And so what Trump is doing is um, running ahead of the game and 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 believing, and we'll see that his Republican Congress won't do anything one way or the other, and so he can just he's testing this stuff. That's what he does. Basically what he wants to do is be a dictator, an authoritarian, and so all this stuff he's doing he's breaking the rules. He's crashing it out the China in the China shop, and he's doing all this stuff to see how far he can go, and if he can end up being like the people he admires most, the leaders he admires most, Xi and Putin and that crowd.
Well, he had a 1 hour conversation with Putin today. And after that 1 hour conversation with Putin, it seems as though he came out and making statements that would lead one to believe that he is waving the white flag and saying that we're done. Because that's the tone of the conversation after the 1 hour meeting that he had on a phone call with Putin today. Putin saying, don't be blowing up these oil tankers. We have an interest in that.
Right. Well, the thing is, Putin, Russia's economy is just oil. Russia, the country of Russia, doesn't make as much money as the state of Texas. You know,
Right.
Russia, if they didn't have the nuclear bomb, they wouldn't even be a player whatsoever
Right.
on the stage. Uh,
Exactly.
right. But
And we don't even know if their nuclear arsenal, if they even work.
right. And we don't want to know. But but the thing is, Putin has Jedi mind tricked Trump. And so whatever he tells Trump, Trump goes for. And now we got Netanyahu, who's also Jedi mind tricking Trump. And so he is a weak and stupid man. He's not a leader.
Well, he is he's a criminal. He's a convicted criminal, and so
Yeah,
criminals think alike.
right,
Um, you
right.
know, Benjamin Netanyahu is under criminal indictment by his government,
Yeah.
and he's trying to stay out of jail.
Yeah, Putin should face the firing squad in Russia tomorrow. He should.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if they thought that they could get away with it, they would. The opposition there would. They would take him out, except for he controls all of everything there, the military and everything, and all the resources, little resources that they have. So, you remember you heard Lindsey Graham talking early on about somebody in Russia needs to take Putin out, but he's actually gone completely silent on that and endorsing what President Trump is doing.
Right. Lindsay is all over the map. I mean, he has no principles, no morals whatsoever. But anyway, this is in a couple of weeks, we can see where everything is. It could be worse. It probably will be worse.
Well, according to Trump, he's saying that it's just about over. That we, are far ahead of schedule, whatever that schedule is, whatever those objectives are.
Yeah, what's happening is the stock market is in a tailspin right now. The price of gasoline is skyrocketing, and so Trump, who never ever likes to admit that he was wrong about something or that he made a mistake, is what he's going to do is declare a victory, which and get the hell out of there. At least that's what I'm hoping, and I think that's going to happen.
Well, of course they're going to, and guess what? He can declare a victory, and the only victory that he can declare is that we were able to demonstrate to the world that we can go up and blow up and bomb a little country, and we can have an old radical guy removed to insert the young radical guy over there. That's what we absolutely know that happened. Yeah. That's the only thing that we know that happened. We can blow up a country. We already know that. You bombed and killed and murdered some people, and you murdered an 86-year-old guy, radical bad guy, to make room for his 30-year younger son to go in and occupy that same position in carrying out their philosophy.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks.
Right. Exactly. Okay. All right. Okay. So you take care, Mark. Okay.
All right. Monroe Anderson, folks, for another edition of Monroe Monday. Listen, I wanted to talk more about this, and we're going to be bringing Barbara Anwar back and the young people who we couldn't get on tonight, but we're going to certainly get them on um, in the past. But at the close of the program, I'm going to talk a little bit more um, about Reverend Jackson, and I'll be talking about Reverend Jackson, for a very, very long time. And then I too will be learning more and more and appreciating more and more about who and what Reverend Jackson actually, the capacity of this individual that many of us had the opportunity to work with, to learn from. And of course, you all know that I am an advocate for equity and justice on issues that we've been working with for a very long time, starting with the photo enforcement of red light cameras and speed cameras, and this infection that municipalities here in Chicago and around the suburban area, that they are addicted and intoxicated on fining and feeing poor people and everyday working people so that they can meet their budgets with these policies where they are violating people's due process, where the state's attorney, the current state's attorney, are violating people's due process by empowering police officers and deferring the job that has, by law, that has been the responsibility of the state's attorney, but empowering a police department that already has a soiled history of having the most wrongful convictions in the United States of America, and empowering them and entrusting them with more power that they will be able to bring charges, felony charges, without there being any oversight. Certainly going to be talking about that. And speaking of that, I'm going to be doing and moderating a conversation at next week's COAL meeting, that's Coalition of African American Leaders, over at the Berto Griffin Design Center at 8237 South Princeton next Saturday morning. So I'm going to be talking with Sharon Butler, one of the public defenders, that we're going to be having a comprehensive conversation around this very topic. And I hope that you all will join us next Saturday morning about that very important conversation. As well as we are working to get the Certificate of Innocence legislation amended so that people who have been exonerated of crimes that they had nothing to do with, that they shouldn't have to go and reprove that they are innocent of that crime once the court has already determined them to be innocent, that they can get their automatic certificate of innocence to move on with their lives. So, but all of this work that we are doing is fueled and undergirded by the lessons that we have learned from people like Reverend Jackson, that I have had the privilege to serve under. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about Reverend Jackson before the end of the podcast. But I really want to talk about this situation with Jesse Jr. Now, I was at both of the celebrations of life, and this thing that has taken over and that has taken off with Jesse Jr. attacking 3 former presidents that were invited and accepted the invitation and made the necessary negotiated arrangements that cost millions of dollars to secure and to bring 3 former presidents, a former vice president, the former secretary of state, to bring them to the celebration of life for Reverend Jackson, and for Jesse Jr. to take the position that he took on attacking these three former presidents, suggesting that these three former presidents knew nothing of his father, was inappropriate, it was irresponsible, and it lacked judgment. I am not sure that that is a person that, well, that we would want to be in a position that are making judgment on public policy for our communities. When they had their challenge before with respect to their indiscretions, and by the way, I didn't support at the time, and I thought that it was a travesty of injustice that he and his wife were committed of crimes and were sent to prison. I think that whatever at the magnitude of the crime, that the punishment of the crimes were not just. But I believe that it was weaponized against Jesse Jr. and his then wife at the time, Sandy Jackson, that it derailed a lot of substantive work between the congressional office, which Jesse Jackson was, and the aldermanic office of the 7th Ward, which Sandy Jackson was at the time. I served as her vice chair of the special service area in that area that she was able to bring forth, and worked on the 3rd airport that Jesse Jackson Jr. had worked very, very hard to bring that to a real possibility when everybody else was bidding against it. And he was able to get it to the point to where 90% of the land has been acquired for the 3rd airport. And we have on O'Hara now where they are going to have to reduce flights because they don't have the capacity. Well, that had been determined more than 30 years ago by the FAA, which has said to the state of Illinois, you need to build a 3rd airport. But you have a governor, Governor Pritzker, along with Bruce Rauner, along with Rahm Emanuel, along with Richard Daley, that have all bucked the airport. And look at what we see happening now is that they're having to reduce flights at O'Hara because they do not have the capacity to keep people safe. Now, with all of that said, I believe that Jesse Jr.'s approach and Jesse Jr.'s doubling down on these comments were completely inappropriate, completely out of context with the celebration of life of Jesse Jackson Sr. This was about Jesse Louis Jackson and the breadth and width of his surface, of his life, and to illuminate to the rest of us a glimpse into the body of work, into the body of his service. And Jesse Jr. co-opted his father's celebration to express whatever he is aggrieved about on the stage of the celebration of the life of his father. I thought it was disrespectful to his father, disrespectful to the celebration of his father, and certainly into the life that his father led, and to the body of work, and to his father's own graciousness that he would extend to people who would attack him. So I think in this sense, because I've received multiple phone calls about those statements, and the question that everybody has, what was he trying to prove? And everybody's comments is about it was bizarre, it's strange, and what is the point? Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden are not in office. Jesse Jr. is not in office. He is looking to get into office. Could this be some sort of self-absorbed attempt of his to exploit his father's celebration for his own political aspiration to advance, and thinking that he would draw attention, and positive support? I'm not so sure that this is drawing positive support. If it is, it's unfortunate, because what he did was irresponsible, it was insensitive, and certainly inappropriate for him to use as a backdrop to whatever he's aggrieved, his father's life celebration. That many of us to this point saw as an extraordinary feat, that to the women who organized and facilitated from the visitation to the services, did a remarkable, extraordinary job at being able to manage the personalities, to be able to respond to the different demands and desires, I'm sure, that people wanted to have. But this was something that you will not witness in our lifetime ever again, of what it was that we experienced and witnessed. And I think that is extraordinary lack of judgment that Jesse Jackson Jr. demonstrated in whatever this was and whatever the purpose of it was, that it was pointless. And I think that it exemplifies something in someone with such extraordinarily of a high intelligence level, and certainly has demonstrated before that of things that they were able to accomplish, but may have just demonstrated to us why he may not necessarily be the best possible fit, especially in a time where we need people to have sound judgment in serving in these important positions, making important decisions for the benefit of the lives of millions of people for generations. I believe that Jesse Jackson Jr. let us all down by this behavior that we witnessed which seemed to come from some sort of bitterness. At least that's the way that it was presented. It was very abrasive. It was very dismissive. And very self-serving. Very self-serving. So, and from somebody who certainly should know better, certainly should know better. And I'm only sorry that somebody did not pull Jesse's coattail or pull him aside and tell him to stop it. This is certainly not the stage and not the place to demonstrate your grievance. This was the time for us to celebrate Jesse Lewis Jackson and for us to appreciate the gravity and the breadth and width of this man's contribution that came out of this one human being, of what God can pour into one person and how he can use one person to impact millions of lives all across this planet. And to take the position that Jesse Jr. took and to pour a blotch on what was otherwise the most extraordinary experience that any of us will ever witness in our lifetime. And I don't make any bones about what we are experiencing and what I am saying, because I think that his position was one of extraordinarily irresponsibility. And this would not be a person that I would want to have in the position of the United States House of Representatives. He has certainly demonstrated lack of judgment, a lack of poise, and even in this case, a lack of dignity. And I think that he owes an apology, not to us, but I think he certainly owes an apology to his mother and to his family for his gross display the stain that he put on the celebration. Now, when I say the stain on the celebration, it was merely an interruption, because we are going to continue to celebrate and to take in the magnitude of Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. and what he actually contributed, because we are going to be made more to be able to appreciate the breadth and the width of this man's contribution, of what he did and what he was able to bring and to do. And the way that we honor Jesse Jackson Sr. is that we get engaged. And if you've been disengaged, you re-engage and you continue to move forward. Pick a lane, pick a place to get involved, to re-engage yourself, to make a difference. Because that was the one thing, and the thematic thrust between the three former presidents that they talked about is to find space where you can make a difference in helping someone else. Because that's what advocacy is all about. It is not about self-recognition. It is not about self-adulation. It is about being selfless and using what you have and who you are to make a difference from somebody else who is marginalized, someone else who needs a boost, someone else who needs someone to advocate on their behalf. That is what re-engaging is. It is not about self-adulation. It is not about being recognized as this or that or the other. However, doing the work, being a person of service, and I can understand how, we all like to be appreciated. But when you are challenging the status quo and you're challenging injustices, it becomes controversial and it becomes uncomfortable. But as the late Vernon Johns, the late great Vernon Johns, who was the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama, prior to Dr. King, who, if you haven't seen it, you ought to go see. You can see it on Tubi, on YouTube, the Vernon John story. This was a man who, back in the 60s, in the 50s, that stood up to Jim Crow and bigotry at a time where we didn't have the safeguards that we have today. But he recited one thing that he said that his father says, that if you see a good fight, get in it. And there are so many areas that are a good fight that we need to get into. That should be what honoring Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson really should be about. If you want to honor Reverend Jackson, the best way to honor Reverend Jackson is to get into a good fight, to find your lane and find a place that you could be of service to someone else. Because on February the 17th of 2026, at the age of 84, Reverend Jackson made his transition. He lived 84 years. He served for 1,012 months. He continued to work for 739,512 hours, and he never quit. And he gave us all that we have. And one of the great poems by the great former president of Morehouse College, Benjamin Elijah Mays, who said, I've only 60 minutes. I've only 1 minute, only 60 seconds in it. I did not seek it. I did not choose it, but it is up to me to use it. I must give an account if I lose it, and be held accountable if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but my eternity is wrapped up in it. We are so grateful that we got to share 44 million and some of 44,370,720 minutes of the life of Jesse Louis Jackson. Until next week, this is Mark Wallace signing off for this week's edition of The People Show on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio. Good night.